I'm your bedtime historian, and it's funny, isn't it? How the gods who promised order were born from cosmic chaos, only to betray their own kind in the name of peace. In the flicker of oil lamps, let's slip behind Olympus's marble columns, where whispered oaths and broken promises echo louder than thunder. Titans devoured their young, children dethroned fathers, and somewhere in that divine upheaval, a new hierarchy rose, one that claimed to tame the world, yet bristled with secrets more dangerous than the monsters they conquered. If you'd rather drift off with secrets, then silence may be tapped. Like and subscribe. There's always another myth tucked behind a closed eyelid here. If you're half awake, tell me, which old god would you have trusted least at your dinner table? Now dim the lights, tuck your feet under blankets, and follow me into the first shadows cast by Olympus's gilded thrones. You stand at the edge of a sky that isn't quite sky, yet an endless swirl of chaos, where primordial beings wrestle in formless dusk. Here before Zeus's thunderbolts crack the world awake, you glimpse a family feud so monumental it leaves scars on the bones of the earth. The Titans Kronos, Oceanus, Hyperion. These aren't gentle storytale giants. They're heavy-limbed tyrants devouring time life, and sometimes their own children, hoping to outrun prophecies that gnaw at their crowns. A hush hangs over Mount Othrys as Kronos swallows his brood, one squirming infant after another, until Rhea, weary and cunning, hides Zeus away in a cave, dripping with goat's milk and honey. Some scholars still debate whether this myth masks an ancient shift in cult's Earth Mother worship, supplanted by Sky Father Thunder. You duck under low-hung branches near that secret cave, the rustle of goat hooves echoing like distant drums of rebellion. In that damp cradle of stone and moss, Zeus grows teeth sharper than storms, learning that mercy has no place in power, plays among immortals. When he's strong enough, he doesn't just free his siblings, he arms them, rallies them, and storms the halls of his father's generation in a clash so violent it cracks open Tartarus to swallow the defeated. It's a tale told often, but always with the soft edges filed off, no mention of the lingering fear among the victors that they too might be devoured by a prophecy, a sibling, or the ambition of their own children. Historians still argue whether this brutal divine coup reflects real memories of older cults erased by conquering tribes, or just a delicious metaphor for how power always eats its own tail. You wander now through the marble ruins where Zeus's throne first rose. Each column is etched with quiet reminders that no god reigns forever, tiny votive offerings, wedged between stones by worshippers hedging bets against the next betrayal. A strand of goat hair, a slip of wool, a half-burned candle, tokens of a people who knew their protectors might just as easily turn devourer when shadows gather thick around Olympus. Sleep comes easier when you realize that every golden throne is built on the bones of the last. So when you close your eyes tonight, listen for the faint echoes of the old gods buried in the walls, hidden in the winds, always waiting for a chance to claw their way back through cracks in marble and memory. A sudden hush, like the moment just before a thunderstorm, settles around you as you step deeper into Zeus's domain, where lightning is silent and revenge wears a soft smile. You drift among columns that never sleep, each carved with scenes of Zeus, hurling bolts from the heavens, kingly and triumphant. But behind the obvious flashes of thunder, there lurk quieter storms, punishments so hushed they slip through myths half told, drifting like smoke from temples now crumbled to dust. For every bolt that scorched a giant, there was a whisper that ruined a rival's hope. A secret exile, a lover turned to mist before gossip could stain Olympus's marble floors. Take the tale of Salmoneus, who dared mimic Zeus's thunder. In plays and temple friezes, you see him strut across a rickety bridge, iron chariot wheels sparking over stones, as he demands worship from frightened villagers. The bold fool, Zeus, so the story goes, struck him down in an instant. No trial, no second chance. Yet scraps of older hymns hint he wasn't just killed. His city was swallowed, his name scrubbed from prayers, his children scattered so thoroughly that later poets forgot they'd ever breathed the same air as gods. Some scholars still debate if Salmoneus' story masked a real priest-king's fall, an ancient warning to petty rulers dreaming too loudly of thunder. You pass now through garden courtyards behind Olympus's grand facade. Shrines overgrown with fig and laurel hide offerings to Zeus's subtler side. Here, lovers of wrong bloodlines vanished on wedding nights. Here, jealous rivals found themselves exiled in animal skins, reborn as stags or swans. A soft rustle among olive branches might just be Io, forever wandering cow-eyed and doomed, because Zeus's hidden vengeance wrapped her in hoof and horn. And there's the tale of Sisyphus, the cunning king, who dared outwit death not once but twice. We remember the boulder endlessly rolling uphill, but less often do we linger on how Zeus's patience broke. Some say the thunderer could have obliterated Sisyphus outright. Instead, he chose a quieter cruelty, let him roll that stone forever. No spectacle, just an eternity of pointlessness to remind mortals and lesser gods that no trickster slips the net forever. Researchers continue to debate whether Sisyphus was once a sun hero dragged down from glory by new myths that needed mortal arrogance as a warning label. The temple priests rarely spoke of these muted punishments. A thunderbolt dazzles crowds, but a rumor in the dark keeps them awake. You walk past these silent stones, now sensing that for Zeus, punishment wasn't about justice, it was about memory. A scorched city might heal, but a whisper of hidden revenge lives forever in the hush before the next storm. If you listen closely, you might hear the soft sigh of a distant breeze, someone's name erased from the marble so thoroughly that only a stray dream might carry it back. It's enough to make you wonder which secrets the old priests kept hidden in hollow columns, scratched behind frescoes, or muttered between sips of sacrificial wine. Historians still argue if some of these punishments were ever real at all, or just cautionary tales to keep mortal hearts trembling under clouded skies. You pause under a gnarled olive tree, feeling how the bark twists like a story half remembered. Somewhere deep in that twisting wood, a forgotten oath might still curl in shadows, reminding you that the king of gods didn't always roar. Sometimes his revenge arrives silent as the owl that watches you now, wide-eyed, unblinking, waiting for your dreams to wander too close to Olympus's hidden storms. The wind shifts, carrying a whisper of peacock feathers brushing temple doors. Hera has entered your dreams now, and she rarely leaves quietly. Step softly into her chambers, half hidden behind marble walls and perfumed with wild thyme and bruised rose petals. The myths call her Zeus's wife, queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage. But between those titles curls a serpent of suspicion, jealousy woven, not as flaw, but as weapon. Hera's fury is painted large in the grand stories, the storm she unleashes, the thunderous rows with Zeus, when his wanderings leave villages full of half-divine bastards. Yet for every thunderclap, there's a quieter war, a curse laid in secret, a child's life bent sideways before it can bloom. Take poor Semele coaxed by Hera's disguised whispers to demand that Zeus reveal his true form. He does lightning incarnate blazing immortality. Semele mortal and flammable dissolves in flame. Zeus saves the unborn Dionysus by stitching him into his thigh, but Hera's echo lingers. Some scholars wonder if the story hides older rites, where priestesses once burned offerings that symbolized human sacrifice. No one agrees. The truth is lost in ashes. You wander now through a countryside battered by Hera's grudges. Echoes of lost kingdoms linger among olive groves and broken walls. Cities that hosted Zeus's lovers. Argos Thebes often found themselves under Hera's cloudy gaze, not with armies clashing on open plains, but with crops failing storms, lingering longer than reason heirs, vanishing without heirs of their own. Historians still puzzle over whether these myths reflect real feuds between rival cults. Hera's local shrines fighting Zeus's expanding worship for tribute and power. In your drifting steps, you find yourself by the banks of the river Inachus. They say Io, once a priestess in Hera's own temple, caught Zeus's wandering eye and paid the price. Transformed into a white heifer, stung endlessly by a gadfly, conjured from Hera's spite, Io wandered continents. You almost hear her lowing in the reeds tonight, a soft moan of punishment that never ends. Some say this myth helped ancient Greeks explain the migration of cattle across lands too dry for herds. Others claim Io's tears were the dew that kept the Nile alive. There is no scholarly consensus on why her story refuses to die. Beneath Hera's veils, vengeance isn't rage thrown like a spear. It's a patient tightening of a knot around her rivals' throats. Her temples gleamed with peacock motifs, feathers that never closed eyes, that never slept. Priests whispered her name at marriage altars and beside sickbeds where lovers waited for healing. Devotion bought forgiveness sometimes, but stray just once, and the Queen of Olympus would remember. A storm delayed by years is still a storm when it arrives. Even her children were weapons in quiet wars. Hephaestus, the lame smith, was flung from Olympus for his ugliness, or for daring to forge his mother's fury into shining barbed gifts. In every myth, Hera's children remind you that the divine family tree bears fruit, sweet and poisoned alike. As you rest beneath her painted ceiling, 1,000 peacock eyes seem to follow your drifting thoughts. You feel the soft brush of silk veils, smell the tang of burning myrrh, and wonder if Hera sits beside your bed tonight. What secrets might she slip into your dreams? What small, unseen war might she spark with a single word whispered into your half-sleep? Perhaps you'll wake tomorrow, craving a truth you can't name proof, that queens can shape empires without ever lifting a blade. Or maybe you'll remember nothing at all except the rustle of feathers fading as dawn breaks. A salt-soaked breeze curls around your ankles, now carrying with it the brine and sigh of endless tides. Poseidon has arrived, trident poised, not for battle, but to stir secrets sunken deep beneath myth's shifting waves. Follow the sound of crashing surf to the gods' forgotten shorelines. Most remember Poseidon as the roaring master of earthquake storms and horses flinging ships onto rocks, with a flick of his trident when sailors failed to sacrifice enough black bulls or silver coins. But step closer to the tide pools, hidden behind crumbling temples, and you'll find whispers of children he sired monstrous, unloved, abandoned to the sea's cold cradle. One of these half-forgotten offspring is Charybdis, the hunger beneath waves. They say she was once a maiden. Some call her Poseidon's daughter. Some say a mortal queen too greedy for his favor. For stealing land from Zeus's coastlines, in her father's name, she was chained to the seafloor, doomed to swallow the ocean, and spit it back 3 times a day. Sailors who glimpsed her gaping maw had seconds to pray. Historians continue to debate whether Charybdis's legend masked real whirlpools that devoured ancient ships, or if she was born purely from coastal villagers explaining tides with teeth. Wander down a narrow spit of sand, where the sea whispers its confessions to the moon. Here you stumble on the tale of Cyclops Polyphemus, another child that stories half claim for Poseidon. Was he truly divine, or just a lonely shepherd with one baleful eye tangled into myth after Odysseus's cleverness left him blind and howling? Some scholars wonder if the Cyclops were stand-ins for ancient tribes whose coastal caves hid flocks and secrets giants in rumor only with fathers as vast as the sea itself. Closer to the surf, the air thickens with salt and the scent of rotting kelp. There are rumors, faint half-washed, from marble inscriptions of other monstrous kin, sea serpents scaled, colossi misshapen suns. Poseidon abandoned when they threatened his glittering image as the god of stallions and shipbuilders. To the people who lived by the shore, these creatures were reminders that the sea gave life, but could take it back with teeth and tentacles. In tiny fishing villages, old priests offered blood and barley, hoping to soothe the forgotten children that tugged fishermen's nets down into blackness. A coiled shadow beneath a skiff might be a common shark, or something older, hungrier, wanting to drag mortal memory into salt and silence. No inscription names them all. No poet sang their epics. But you can feel them now drifting below your bare feet on the sand. Impossible, restless shapes waiting to be remembered. Poseidon himself seems carved in contradictions, a god who fathered horses yet unleashed earthquakes to swallow stables whole. A ruler of coral palaces who never quite shed the barnacles clinging to his family tree. You wonder, standing here with salt drying on your skin, whether he regrets these lost children, scattered, feared, unclaimed by marble altars polished for more respectable offspring. You trail your hand through the frothy edge of a wave, half expecting some scaled limb to reach back. In the hush of midnight tides, even the sea god's laughter sounds like a threat softened by centuries. Somewhere deep beyond mortal sight, his forgotten brood waits in undersea grottos, teeth filed by time stories, polished smooth by currents, secrets coiled tight until another dreamer listens too closely to the surf. When you drift toward sleep tonight, let the hush of those sunken myths rock you gently. And remember, even the calmest tide can hide a father's shame and a monster's lullaby. A hush thicker than seawater slips in as you leave Poseidon's restless shores and descend step by step into the underworld's shaded corridors, where Hades waits, not with fire and brimstone, but with deals struck in whispers that never reach the sunlit world above. You find yourself at the mouth of a cavern, its entrance framed by cypress and yew. The air here tastes of minerals and old promises, heavy with the scent of burnt offerings left by mourners hoping to tip the scales of eternity. Most tales paint Hades as grim but fair a custodian rather than a tyrant. Yet among the scattered hymns and fading prayers lie rumors that his kingdom runs not on iron rule, but on small, unseen trades. You drift along the banks of the river Styx, its sluggish current carrying more secrets than souls. Shades those drifting ghosts of the newly dead shuffle forward, clinking coins in skeletal hands. One by one, they pay Charon for passage, but what happens when a soul has no coin? Some scraps of lost plays suggest that desperate shades bartered with secrets, instead, whispers of the living, hushed betrayals. Truth so raw, they weighed as heavy as gold. Some scholars argue whether these stories were cautionary or simply poetic. No single marble inscription settles it. A torch sputters ahead, throwing your shadow on walls slick with underworld mist. In one crumbling alcove, you stumble upon the myth of Orpheus, who sang so sweetly that Hades and Persephone agreed to his bargain. Life returned to a dead bride so long as Orpheus trusted the underworld's promise and never looked back. We know how that ended. Eurydice lost again, the final debt paid with a backward glance. But older fragments hint at versions where Orpheus struck other deals, songs traded for secrets, secrets traded for songs that could make even the stone-hearted weep. Further in, beneath a vaulted ceiling of cold rock, a shadowy court murmurs. Here some say shades who served their bargains well, delivering gossip from above or betraying other ghosts, earned tiny freedoms. A warm breeze in an otherwise frigid eternity, a sip of forgotten wine, a dream of sunlight slipping through eyelids that no longer exist. No epic tells these stories straight. Historians still puzzle over lines scratched into tomb walls, half-legible spells meant to coax Hades into listening. You drift past Cerberus, dozing with three heads curled around bones of kings and paupers alike. His snores rumble like distant thunder, reminding you that every freedom here has a leash. Some whisper that Hades rarely enforced punishment with brute force. Why waste energy when rumor and promise work better than chains? In one dusty chamber, under a flickering lamp, an inscription curls in half-broken Greek promises, bound in shadow. Hold until the dawn forgets them. Maybe it was just a funeral charm. Maybe it was a warning to any mortal fool enough to think the dead can keep secrets forever. And yet, in this hush, you feel something oddly gentle about Hades's realm. Unlike Olympus, where betrayal is brass and blazing here, every treachery wears a cloak of courtesy. No thunderbolts, no earthquakes, just a kingdom built on bargains that bind the dead to silence, and the living to wonder what price they might pay next. When you turn to leave, the tunnel doesn't protest. The deals stay here, tucked into the corners of stone passageways and the hum of the sticks. And above you, the world goes on new secrets, ready to drift down like dust into this realm, where every whisper has its cost, and every debt waits to be paid when your eyes grow heavy. A soft flutter of petals brushes your cheek as you rise from the underworld's gloom, halfway caught between shade and sunlight, following Persephone's quiet footsteps back into the living world she never fully left behind. Imagine her now, a goddess of contradictions, crowned with flowers that bloom where her feet touch frost-hardened earth. Stories call her Hades's reluctant queen, stolen from a meadow and bound to darkness by a handful of pomegranate seeds. But listen closer, and you'll hear the subtle rustle of defiance woven into every petal she scatters along the border between the underworld and the waking world. You find her in a clearing where snowdrop buds peek through late winter's thaw. Ancient villagers whispered that each spring's first bloom was Persephone's coded message to the world above, proof that no bargain, no king of shadows could silence life forever. Historians still debate whether these flower myths sprang from older earth goddess cults that Persephone absorbed, shifting from captive maiden to subtle sovereign of death and rebirth. Wander the narrow paths leading from orchard to tomb, and you'll sense how she learned to slip secrets through roots and vines. Some say Persephone taught mortals to mark graves with herbs that grew wild only when she roamed the upper world. Others claim that hidden among temple gardens were coded patterns, irises planted beside fennel, signifying safe passage for the soul. No surviving scroll agrees, of course. Scholars still argue if these coded gardens were real, or simply late poets' inventions to soften the grim grip of death. Step lightly now, her kingdom never quite lets her go. Each half year Persephone slips back underground, and the soil grows heavy with hush and bone. Yet even in those months, small rebellions sprout. A trickle of meltwater breaks a river's frozen skin. An orchard branch blossoms out of season. Farmers swear they see her hair dusted with ash skirts, trailing frost, leaving clues that spring will return, no matter how deep Hades tucks her away. One story drifts through the temple ruins of Eleusis, where initiates of Persephone's mysteries carried secrets no enemy could steal. A hush settled on these rituals so completely that not even the conquering Romans dared break the spell. What was whispered there? No stone tablet confesses it. A single line scratched into a clay votive survives. When seeds sleep, a queen keeps watch. Researchers continue to wonder if this line hides coded instructions for harvest or simply reminds the living that the Queen of Shadows never forgets her gardens. You pause by an old olive press, its stones slick with time. Here village women once traded rumors that Persephone's return coaxed oil from the pits, each drop a blessing, a hush of warmth in the lean months. A small act of resistance against the chill that claimed orchards and hope alike. As you stand beneath a fig tree, straining to blossom before its time, you might sense her presence, a drift of perfume, half pomegranate, half turned soil. A promise that death is never the final word. A reminder that even in the deepest cavern, a seed can crack stone if it listens for her footsteps above. So when your eyes grow heavy tonight, imagine Persephone weaving between worlds, half queen of shadows, half wild blossom daring to push through frost. Listen for her coded messages tucked in spring's first thaw, in gardens blooming where they shouldn't, in a single flower nodding where no flower should grow. Because no kingdom, no god, thunder-wielding or shade-bound, can cage a queen who wears seasons like armor and secrets like seeds. A hush of strings and distant hymns draws you forward now, away from thawing orchards and back into sunlit marble courtyards where Apollo stands all golden hair and polished lyre, a god draped in warmth and bright prophecies. But lean closer, and you'll catch the shadow trembling behind his songs, a darker art he wielded with the same serene smile that promised hope to trembling mortals. Picture him seated at Delphi, where the Pythia sways over a fissure that exhales secrets through coils of sweet-smelling gas. Pilgrims kneel. Coins clutch tight questions about harvests, children wars. And always, Apollo answers sometimes with riddles, sometimes with dreadful clarity. It's easy to forget that this radiant god, so skilled in music and healing, was also a plague bringer. His arrows didn't always pierce with sunlight. They carried sickness too. You follow a whisper through the laurel groves, sacred to him. Leaves shiver, as if gossiping about the time he unleashed pestilence on the Greek camp before Troy, a lesson for mortals who dared offend his priest. Homer sang it as a hero's tale, but scraps of older clay tablets hint that local healers once invoked Apollo's wrath as a warning: respect the hidden contracts between humans and gods, or risk a fever with no cure. Historians still argue if the plague arrows were poetic metaphor or half memory of real disease outbreaks pinned on the divine. Beneath the columns of his temple, the oracles hum with dread as much as hope. The Pythia's breath carries rumors that some prophecies were twisted to guide rulers into ruin, all while Apollo's cult collected tribute and power. Some say rival priests were poisoned, slowly purified by the gods' unseen arrows. No marble stele admits this yet. The rumors cling like ivy to the temple walls. A single black crow flits through the sunbeam above you. It reminds you of another fragment, how Apollo once cursed his own sacred bird for betraying secrets. The feathers turned from white to night's hue, a stain of guilt perched on branches where no one dares listen too closely. Scholars remain divided on whether this myth covers older rituals that bound crows to omens, or if it's simply a tale spun to explain feathers dark as ink. Wander farther, and you'll hear tales that Apollo's healing was never free of shadows. When he taught humans the art of medicine through Chiron and Asclepius, he also sowed fear. A plague god who gives the cure always at a cost. Whispered curses on rivals disguised as healing herbs, or patients who recovered only to find themselves bound by new debts to the god's oracles. Nothing so direct survives in stone or script, but listen to the hush around the laurel, and you'll sense it. Every cure tastes faintly of poison if you drink too deep. You pause at a sunlit pool, its surface scattered with laurel leaves. Pilgrims once bathed here, hoping to rinse away sickness or guilt under Apollo's bright gaze. Yet somewhere beneath the reflection, the dark arts swirl illnesses conjured to test loyalty visions, twisted to turn kings against neighbors. It's said some priests even spread rumors of divine illness to quash dissent. Whether truth or temple gossip, no single historian agrees. So when you close your eyes tonight and drift under Apollo's golden hymns, remember the hush behind the harp strings. The same God who gifted music and light might slip a fever into your dreams, just enough to remind you that even the brightest truths hide shadows if you tilt your head just so. Let the lyre's last note linger. In its fading echo, a promised prophecy comforts you, but only because it knows exactly how to keep you awake. The warmth of Apollo's strings fades, now replaced by the rustle of leaves under a waxing moon. Artemis steps into your path, bow in hand, a goddess of wilderness and sharp silences that never beg forgiveness. Slip into her forest, where the undergrowth bristles with secrets older than any marble temple. To poets, Artemis is the huntress crowned in silver, protector of wild creatures and maidens alike. But tread deeper into her groves, and you'll sense how quickly that protection curdles into vengeance when mortals forget where her sacred boundaries lie. You brush past a tangle of thorny underbrush and find the story of Actaeon waiting for you like a snare. A young hunter, they say, who stumbled into a glade at the wrong moment and glimpsed Artemis bathing in a pool ringed with mist. Some versions claim it was an accident, an unlucky turn through the woods. Others hint he sought her on purpose, hoping for forbidden knowledge of her rights. Either way, Artemis's wrath was quick and wordless. She flicked a drop of water toward him, one drop, and his body split and twisted until fur covered his skin. Transformed into a stag, Actaeon fled only to be torn apart by his own hounds. Scholars still argue whether this tale masks older taboos, a whispered rule to keep men out of women's forest sanctuaries. Step further into her realm, and you find other tales less sung at hearths. Villages once laid offerings of honey and fawn's blood along paths no one dared walk. After dusk, paths said to win toward Artemis's secret oaths. They spoke of how she would appear beside the dying arrow, tipped with mercy for some, with retribution for others. A sick child cured overnight might owe their life to her softer edge. But a poacher or an arrogant noble claiming the sacred hunt for himself, they vanished. Some left behind only broken branches and a trail of red to the nearest ravine. Rustle through the leaves and find the myth of Niobe Queen, who boasted of her many children, too many, she bragged to fear any goddess of birth or hunt. For her pride, Artemis and Apollo together loosed arrows that silenced Niobe's line. Statues freeze her weeping stone figure mid-sob, but the forest remembers a harsher hush the price paid, when mortal mouths mock gods who govern the raw edges of life and death. Some historians see in Niobe's downfall a memory of rival cults crushed by Artemis's worshippers, yet surviving records coil in circles never clear enough to settle that claim. A breeze carries the scent of pine smoke, echoes of ancient rituals, where young girls danced barefoot, bow in hand, pledging themselves to Artemis's service for a season before returning home as women marked by the wild. Some returned, whispering of hunts that blurred the line between prey and predator protector and executioner. No shrine inscription says so outright, but some scholars suspect these rites taught more than modesty. They bound communities to the goddess's fierce laws trespass, and you face her arrows no matter who you are. You stand now in a moonlit glade where deer flicker like ghosts between trees. Somewhere in the hush, you feel Artemis's blood oaths humming through root and branch. She does not roar like Zeus or rumble like Poseidon. She appears when the forest holds its breath, when the owl turns its head, when you step too far off the path, and your heartbeat thunders loud enough to wake the huntress from her quiet watch. So close your eyes tonight with care. Drift gently into sleep, but remember the next time you find yourself in a dream, thick with trees and the snap of twigs behind you, it may be Artemis protector or predator deciding which arrow you've earned. A hush of feathers and a flicker of torchlight guide you away from Artemis's shadowed groves to the marble halls where Athena waits, owl-eyed and patient, with secrets sharper than any spear she ever hurled. Walk softly through her temple, its columns humming with stories of strategy and wisdom. The poets carved Athena as the goddess of reason and war's careful balance, but wander close to the shadows under her statues, and you'll find quieter myths, ones that hint she shaped fates, with a glance rewriting destiny so subtly that only the changed remembered the change at all. Slip past the olive tree planted by her hand, its leaves rattling like whispered truths. Here an old tale clings to stone, how Medusa's hair once shimmered with mortal beauty, until Athena transformed her into a serpent-crowned warning. Many know this version Athena punishing vanity or protecting her temple's sanctity, but in older scraps of story, Medusa's fate reads more like a protection than a curse. Some say Athena's way of shielding a victim by making her too terrible to touch. Historians continue to debate which version hides the oldest truth, the goddess's vengeance, or her mercy hidden in monstrous form. Wander deeper into Athena's city, and you'll pass doorways draped in woven cloth patterns said to be born from Arachne's loom. A mortal so gifted she dared to outweave the goddess herself. Some versions claim Athena struck her down for arrogance, twisting her fingers into a spider's spindly legs so she might spin forever. But softer versions whisper that the goddess gave Arachne an escape a second life to weave in secret threads glistening with dew before mortals wake. Researchers still argue whether this myth once explained sacred weaving rituals or cautioned against artisans who stitch scandalous truths into cloth. A breeze flutters parchment scrolls stacked high in an ancient library, Athena's quiet sanctuary for hidden knowledge. Some say she gave kings their cleverness with a mere nod, while others mutter she just as often stole cunning away when rulers grew too bold. You trace your fingers along a shelf where a single papyrus curls like a sleeping snake. On it, faint lines tell of a village girl who woke from a dream, speaking riddles no oracle could solve until Athena plucked the dream from her tongue, leaving behind only silence and the trace of a half-remembered answer. No surviving tablet explains who the girl was or what secret she almost spoke. Historians remain divided on whether these stories echo real priestess codes or simply poets' flourishes. Slip outside to the Parthenon steps, where the wind hums through spears of marble and olive branch alike. Athena's transformations were never just for mortals. Some say she shifts herself, to appearing in armor, to warriors as an owl, to philosophers, as a whisper in the ear of a poet, scratching lines by lantern light. If you stand still enough, you might feel her shape shift behind your eyelids. Now an idea coiling into your thoughts, a decision twisted subtly at the last moment so that you walk left instead of right. Scholars puzzle endlessly over how she balanced these quiet interferences with her image as a protector of clear logic. But logic bends easily in the hands of a goddess who knows that truth is just clay, waiting to be molded by the right thought, the right look, the right secret, never quite spoken aloud. So tonight, as your breathing slows and sleep curls around your limbs, feel Athena's secret stir the air near your bed. Perhaps she changes nothing at all, or perhaps when you wake, you'll find a single detail out of place. A tiny thread pulled, a memory softened, a truth turned sideways by the gaze of a goddess who shapes fates not with storms or thunder, but with a glance only you will ever know happened. The rustle of parchment fades, and now the air thickens with wine-soaked hymns, drifting from torchlit groves. Dionysus approaches half-smile hidden behind ivy, and the soft clink of a cup, refilled one too many times. Slip through a tangle of vines into his world, where the stories sung at polite banquets leave out the trembling edge beneath his laughter. To most, Dionysus is the god of revelry harvests, and the vine's generous gift, a figure draped in purple robes crowned with grape leaves, bringing celebration to dark winters. But behind the gilded cups and gentle temple songs lie darker revels half masked by incense and polite prayers. You stand at the edge of a clearing where his followers maenads once danced until dawn blurred thought into instinct. Ancient texts tell of wild rites softened for delicate ears. Women tearing through forests, hair unbound eyes shining with something too bright to name. They called it ecstasy, but listen closer. Under the drumming feet and the clash of bronze cymbals, a different note lingers. Stories murmur of strangers torn limb from limb in a frenzy mistaken for worship. Historians still argue whether these tales were real accounts of secret rituals or cautionary whispers spread by rival priests who feared Dionysus's promise of freedom. You step over broken amphorae shards that once held wine sweet enough to loosen tongues. Here, the god's dread revels slip through polite society like spilled nectar staining marble floors. In Thebes, they say he punished King Pentheus, not with thunder or plague, but with a twist of mind. Pentheus, spying on Dionysus's followers, was torn apart by his own mother and aunts who mistook him for a beast. Some claim the myth was a parable about the cost of denying the wild within. Others suspect it hints at rites so unsettling they had to be hidden behind metaphor. Pass through the torchlit grove, and you'll find votive masks half buried under vines. Revelers donned them to shed their mortal selves, letting the god move through them like wine through an empty cup. Those who watch from safe distances only saw laughter and song. But if you listen, you'll hear rumors of shadows slipping between trees, unwritten pacts forged in trance, revenge plotted in whispers, drowned by drumbeats. No temple record confirms this, but every broken mask hums the possibility. A breeze tangles your hair with the scent of fermented fruit and crushed herbs. It carries fragments of other myths, too. How Dionysus drifted between worlds, never quite at home on Olympus. A wanderer god, born from flame and thigh forever, on the edge of banishment. Some scholars puzzle over how his cult spread so far, weaving through old agricultural rites, slipping into cities where wine dulled hunger and loosened old grudges. His dread revels offered escape, but never promised it free of cost. You stand now where forest meets village. Farmers once left offerings at crossroads, a cup of new wine, a sprig of ivy, a whispered hope that the revels would pass their door without claiming a lamb, a daughter, a half-suspected sin. In some places, the old rites lingered longer than temples dared admit secret festivals when the moon was high and the vines dripped heavy with unpicked fruit. Dionysus's laughter drifts behind you, now warm and soft. He promises delight, yet leaves your pulse quickened, half wondering if your own mind would hold if you step too deep into the thrumming circle of dancers. Perhaps that's the lesson hidden in his half-dreadful revels. Joy and madness share the same cup, and a god who pours, one can always pour the other. So when your lids grow heavy tonight, and you dream of flickering torches and laughter echoing through the vines, listen for the hush that follows the last drumbeat. In that silence, Dionysus smiles, reminding you that some secrets taste sweetest when they're sipped in shadows. The drums fade behind you, now replaced by the steady hiss of bellows, and the ring of hammer on bronze follow the glow into Hephaestus's forge, where grudges are shaped in iron and secrets cool beneath anvils no sunlight ever touches. Step inside the god's workshop, carved deep into volcanic rock, smoke curling from cracks, like gossip no wind can scatter. Hephaestus, the lame smith child of Hera, cast from Olympus for his twisted leg, or so the old poets claim. Yet while Zeus thundered and Athena plotted, it was Hephaestus's fire that turned betrayal into polished blades, revenge into cunning hinges, and grudges into bronze masks, smooth as any diplomat's smile. You wander past tools half buried in ash. They say his forge birthed wonders for the gods. Achilles' armor, gleaming like dawn. Hermes' winged sandals, chains so fine they trapped Ares and Aphrodite mid-embrace. But listen deeper. Between the clang of hammers, quieter rumors echo. Some tales hint Hephaestus crafted more than grand gifts. There were whispers of secret commissions, daggers balanced to spill divine bloodlocks, so cunning they turned palaces into prisons for careless kings. Historians still debate whether these tales grew from local blacksmiths' reputations, mortal men, whose forges held more power than any crown dared admit. You brush past a heap of discarded bronze scraps, shaped like half-finished traps. One story drifts from the island of Lemnos, where mortals claimed Hephaestus sometimes granted them a fragment of his craft. A hidden mechanism here, an unbreakable chain, their small favors traded for offerings left in cold caves. Some say these secret forges sparked whispers of rebellion smelted quietly behind city walls. No inscribed tablet proves it, but somewhere in the forge's hiss, you hear it, the suggestion that fire answers to no king once it learns to feed itself. Closer to the flames, you find the tale of Pandora's jar, fashioned by Hephaestus at Zeus's command, a gift or curse depending on who tells it. He shaped her of clay breath flickering into life on his anvil. Some see Pandora as punishment for Prometheus's theft of fire. Others suspect she was proof that even a craftsman's masterpiece can betray him. Scholars remain divided over whether the jar later softened into a box for polite ears was myth's sly reminder that every gift carries its hidden blade. A gust from the bellows puffs smoke around your feet. You almost see him there. Hephaestus hunched at his anvil, sweat dripping like molten metal eyes, narrowed not in rage but in perfect private calculation. They called him gentle sometimes, mocked his limp, but few dared speak openly of the grudges that glowed hotter than any forge. Who but the smith could lace a cup with chains that trapped a god in his own drunken boasts? Who but Hephaestus could craft a net so fine it caught Ares mid-whisper, exposing secrets that even Olympus couldn't laugh off? Step away from the hearth, and the chill reminds you how much of his work stays hidden. Locks melted down once their betrayal is done. Blades dulled and buried in temple foundations. Gears winding in the shadows behind throne room doors. Some say his forge never truly cools. Somewhere beneath every volcano's sleep hums Hephaestus's private rebellion, a promise that even gods built of thunder and sun can be reshaped by hands that know where to strike. So tonight, when the world grows quiet and you drift toward sleep's edge, listen for the faint hammer tap behind your dreams. Perhaps it's only the pulse in your temples, or perhaps it's the soft forging of secrets meant to remind you power clutched too tightly can always be reforged by the quiet, the bent, the patient. The warmth of the forge fades behind you like an ember swallowed by dusk. Now feel the earth tremble under unseen boots as you wander into Ares' shadow god of war, patron of skirmishes, so shameful no poet dared preserve them in polished lines of marble verse. Step into a battlefield forgotten by history's grand epics. Ares, brash and bloodthirsty in the myths that survived, rarely earned temples as splendid as Zeus's or Athena's. His domain was too raw, too reckless, a thrum of iron and bone rather than strategy or law. Yet lean close to the cracks between recorded wars, and you'll sense him lurking behind skirmishes that left no hero's name, but plenty of quiet graves. Imagine him pacing the edges of Troy, a glint of bronze helm, catching moonlight as he watched champions clash for 10 long years. The Iliad sings of his reckless charge into battle armor, blazing spear thirsty for blood. But stray scraps of lesser-known verses hint at darker scenes, Ares drifting from battlefield to battlefield, sowing discord where he pleased. A whispered rumor says he fought for both sides when it amused him, pulling young men from villages they would never see again. Scholars still argue whether these scraps reflect local feuds, retold with a divine scapegoat, or hint at real skirmishes so small they never made it onto marble tablets. You crouch now in a half-buried trench fingers, brushing broken spearheads. Some say Ares favored the chaos of border raids, those nights when restless kings sent expendable men to test a rival's patience. There was no Homeric flourish for these scraps of blood and pride. No heroes crowned in olive wreaths, just scars hidden under tunics when survivors limped home. Villagers blamed Ares when sons vanished under moonlit banners, never to return except as ghost stories told by mothers at the hearth. Push aside a tuft of thistle and find the tale of the Amazon's warrior women said to be daughters of Ares himself. Most versions soften their raids into legend-fierce maidens who clashed with heroes and fell beneath swords that made kings famous. But softer inscriptions found on weathered stones whisper that some Amazons faded not in battle, but in betrayals unrecorded, cut down in skirmishes, too embarrassing for victors to claim. Historians puzzle over whether these women were real tribes, painted monstrous by fearful neighbors, or pure invention, a reminder that Ares's legacy twists fact into fear as easily as he twists loyalty into bloodlust. In a ruined sanctuary, half swallowed by ivy, you find offerings left by soldiers no bard would sing of. Small iron daggers, cracked shields, a smear of faded red on stone signs that even those who cursed Ares for reckless carnage left him tribute just in case. They knew he might favor a drunken brawl as much as a noble siege. Better to buy off his appetite than risk your name vanishing under the mud with the others. Step carefully over these relics. Ares's disowned battles do not rest easy. Each one hums, with the hum of regret and quiet rage, scraps of war that remind you not every conflict ends with a hero statue. Sometimes the scars stay hidden under tunics, the wounds stitched shut by silence, so that kingdoms may pretend their wars were always glorious. So when you close your eyes tonight and drift toward sleep, remember that the god of war does not always thunder in with drums and banners. Sometimes he crouches beside a campfire where boys pass around battered helmets, each dreaming of honor that tastes like iron and ends in ash. And when the fire dies, Ares slips away into the night, carrying with him every skirmish no one will ever dare to remember. A hush of wing beats passes overhead, and now you find yourself stepping lightly along hidden paths, places where Hermes, the restless messenger, leaves his footprints, half in shadow, half in the hush, between one heartbeat and the next. Beneath Olympus's blazing peaks, Hermes drifts like a rumor carried on a breeze. He's the god of trade trickery, and travelers his sandals laced with quiet mischief. Most stories dress him in harmless pranks, stealing Apollo's cattle as a newborn, crafting the lyre from a tortoise shell, slipping clever words into the ears of merchants hoping for profit. But follow him into the dusk between worlds, and you'll see the underworld tricks that rarely found their way into polite temple prayers. Step past a crossroads marked with a stone herm, one of those squat bearded pillars the ancient Greeks planted to mark territory and watch travelers pass. Offerings of oil and coins once gleamed at their base tokens to persuade Hermes to bless the journey ahead. Yet for those who carried secrets darker than trade, Hermes was more than a road guardian. He was a guide for souls too restless for Hades's quiet halls. Wander down into a dim, root-tangled passage, and you might catch a whisper of his more subtle pacts. Some say he bartered with shades at the Styx, promising freedom in exchange for gossip the living would pay dearly to hear. A rumor here, a family secret. There a king's weakness, a traitor's name passed softly across realms where thunderbolts held no sway. Historians still debate whether these whispers came from real funerary rites or priestly inventions to keep Hermes's altars full of small coins and larger fears. You brush your hand along the rough stone of an old grave marker, half swallowed by moss. Here lie hints that Hermes slipped into tombs not to seal the dead away, but to slip them out if the bargain pleased him. A stray scrap of Orphic hymn suggests that restless spirits could bribe the god to linger at thresholds halfway free. Some say these shades drifted through dreams, planting suspicions that bloomed into war or scandal by dawn. Scholars remain divided. Was this myth or just a poet's way to explain how secrets never truly stay buried? Follow the path where flickering lanterns cast shapes like watchful eyes. Stories murmur of priests who called on Hermes not only to carry prayers, but to steal a rival's words in return. A whispered bribe at a shrine a handful of barley, or a polished shell left under moonlight, small payments for a god who slipped between realms as easily as a fox through brambles. Some villagers believed Hermes favored thieves and tricksters, because he was the greatest trickster of all his crimes, so subtle no thunderbolt ever found him. In old marketplaces, traders carved his symbol into stalls, not just for luck, but as a quiet warning. Every bargain carries an unseen cost. A stolen weight here, a sly shortcut there. Hermes watched, perhaps helped, then vanished before blame could catch his heels. Beneath every honest deal hums the possibility of an underworld trick, a reminder that even a fair trade echoes with secrets carried by winged sandals you'll never hear. Step softly out of this hush, now back toward the land of the breathing. Hermes, they say, moves too quickly for footprints to last. But if you listen, when your own dreams drift near the border of sleep and waking, you might feel him brushing past, carrying a secret borrowed from the dead, ready to trade for something you didn't know you'd give. So tonight, as you slip deeper into sleep, keep an ear half open for the flutter of wings behind your eyelids. Hermes, weaving through shadows, reminding you that every door left ajar is an invitation for a quiet trick to slip through. The echo of wing beats fades into a hush of sighs and salt air as you drift away from Hermes's secret paths and find yourself standing in the ruins of beauty, undone, Aphrodite's quiet ruins, where love's promise dissolves into ash and whispers. Step carefully through crumbling columns draped in ivy and scattered rose petals browned by seasons of neglect. To marble poets, Aphrodite gleams as the goddess of desire, laughter, and the first spark of longing that turns mortal hearts into soft clay. But slip past the polished hymns and soft statue curves, and you'll stumble into her gentler tragedies, the stories where passion lingers too long, curdling into poison that eats cities from the inside out. Kneel beside a toppled shrine where petals once floated on oil lamps, flickering through warm summer nights. Here, lovers carved their names into stone promises meant to outlive their bodies. Yet the wind carries a rumor that some who loved under her blessing fell so deep into longing that kingdoms unraveled wars, sparked not by greed or pride, but by a single kiss turned sour. Historians still argue whether Helen's face truly launched ships for love, or if poets painted Aphrodite's hand over politics too tangled for any mortal to untie. Run your fingers along the faint relief of a goddess rising from sea foam. Some say Aphrodite blessed sailors with safe passage in return for garlands cast into waves. But there are hushed lines in older prayers that hint at a different tide storms, conjured when worship slipped, or when a promise to the goddess of love was broken in silence. Coastal towns, half swallowed by shifting dunes, were once blamed on her quiet fury, where beauty slighted or betrayed became ruin written in salt. Step past a cluster of wild roses pushing through marble cracks. Their thorns cling to an old story of Adonis, the beautiful youth who caught Aphrodite's eye. When a boar's tusk ripped life from his flawless skin, some say she wept so fiercely that anemones sprang from each teardrop. Others whisper, the wound was no accident, but the price of divine jealousy rival gods, reminding Aphrodite that no passion lives untouched by envy's blade. Scholars remain divided on whether the myth masks older rites, mourning rituals softened into fragrant blooms to hide sacrifice's sharp edge. Wander toward a fountain, its water long gone basin cracked and thirsty. Here, lovers once gathered to whisper vows and float petals as offerings. But rumor says the same fountain witnessed betrayals sealed by moonlight knives, hidden under tunics, poison dropped into cups shared too trustingly. Some claim Aphrodite turned away at such moments, others that she lingered, watching love's ruin with a soft smile that knew how easily longing slides into regret. A hush drifts through a grove of cypress behind the broken shrine trees planted where temples fell to ruin when devotion shifted to newer gods, duller promises. Beneath their roots lie coins once pressed into lovers' palms, tokens left behind when passion soured or drifted away like incense smoke. Some believe the trees still hum with the ghosts of vows, too strong to die vows, that echo each time a lonely heart wanders too close. So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy, listen for the sigh of petals falling where no bloom should grow. Aphrodite's quiet ruins remind you that love is never just silk sheets and perfumed oil. It's also the hush that follows when passion unravels, cities turns names to dust, and leaves only a whisper lingering in ruins, where no one remembers who first kissed whom or why it all mattered so terribly once upon a time. The sigh of falling petals drifts into a deeper hush, now carrying you past Aphrodite's wilted gardens to the last corners of Olympus. Those forgotten shrines and broken altars, where minor gods once lingered, their names half lost in the dust of centuries. Step into a clearing where stones slump under moss, too weathered to bear inscriptions anymore. Here, offerings once flickered in the dark crumbs of bread, a lock of hair, a whispered plea carried by a shepherd or sailor, hoping some small deity still listened. Olympus grand in marble, and thunder hid more shadows than any single myth could hold. For every Zeus or Hera, there were dozens, hundreds of lesser spirits who slipped through cracks in prayers and hearth smoke. You pause before a tangle of briar that once crowned a tiny shrine to Hecate's crossroads. Most remember her as the witch's torchbearer, the shadow that stood between thresholds. But older whispers say her power bloomed in neglected corners, places where travelers left offerings at three-way paths, hoping she'd steer wolves or bandits elsewhere. Some say farmers nailed scraps of cloth to her trees to ward off plague or envy. Historians still puzzle over whether these practices grew from real worship or drifted from older nature cults, tangled into Greek religion, like roots through old foundations. Slip deeper into the hush, where Pan's pipes still echo among reeds no shepherd tends anymore. The wild god, with goat's hooves and a laugh that rattled mountain flocks, once held whole valleys in his sway. Yet temples never rose tall for Pan. His kingdom hummed in thickets, in sudden shivers that made grown men drop their crooks and flee the woods at dusk. Some scraps of pottery hint his cults lingered longer than polite society liked to admit, masking the old fear that the forest might reclaim all fields if Pan ever laughed too loud again. Under your feet, fragments of votive offerings crunch like brittle leaves. Tiny figurines of river nymphs crack terracotta masks for harvest spirits whose names faded when city walls rose higher than barley stalks. No poet wrote their epics. No priests built grand marble halls for them to sit in judgment. Instead, they flickered at hearths, slipped through lullabies, hid in the pause between thunderclaps, when villagers wondered if the old ways might yet listen. A breeze stirs the ashes of forgotten hearth fires, where minor household gods once sat in the corner, watching children toss crusts of bread to keep mischief and sickness outside the door. Some say these gods never left at all. They just changed names, melted into saints or shadows that creak the floorboards when a candle gutters out. Scholars remain divided on whether their shrines were truly erased or simply swallowed into new faiths that wore marble masks over older roots. Wander now to a cracked wall that once held a hidden prayer. A scrap of faded paint shows a faceless figure, maybe a harvest spirit, maybe a local river's guardian. It doesn't matter anymore. Time unraveled their worship until only a whisper remains, a sense that someone, something, might still lean close when your breath catches in the dark. So as your eyelids flutter shut tonight, let the echoes of these forgotten gods settle around you like soft dust on old marble. Listen for the hush behind every lullaby and the chill that slips under the door when wind howls at night. Not every god needs thunderbolts or temples. Some linger only in dreams, half-remembered names, waiting for a candle's flicker to wake them once more. And if you listen closely in that hush, you might hear another figure stirring, a hero weighed down not by forgotten shrines, but by labors that never truly end. You stand at the edge of his labors tonight, but not the ones sung by poets and marble statues. Instead, you'll drift through the regrets Heracles never spoke of, quiet costs behind roaring feats. The lion's skin covered more than wounds. It hid a man who broke monsters only to be haunted by what he'd left behind in caves and kingdoms. How many heads did he sever to silence just one whisper of guilt? Historians still puzzle over how a hero so celebrated could leave such private wreckage behind. If this version of Heracles makes you feel slightly better about your own unfinished chores, consider pressing that sleepy like button and drifting into subscribe. It won't clean the Augean stables, but it might sweep a bit of dust from your feed. Somewhere between your pillows and the hush of your breathing, maybe tell me which hero you'd want a regretful cup of wine with if you had the chance. Now dim, the lights settle your bones softer than a lion's pelt, and step through this regretful doorway with me. You find yourself trailing Heracles not at the height of his triumph, but in the low shadows between legends. His first labor, the Nemean lion, left behind a hide that no arrow could pierce, yet the village he saved still whispered about how he'd torn the beast's jaws with his bare hands, red splattering olive branches that never bore fruit again. Some scholars argue whether this slaughter was mercy for the village or punishment for Heracles himself, a hero bound to violence in every form. The Hydra came next, 9 heads each sliced away, only to multiply in his nightmares. When he scorched the stumps to stop their writhing villagers, say they found charred snakeheads miles away buried under reeds, as if they'd tried to crawl home. There's no scholarly consensus on whether the poison from those fangs cursed the hero's mind long after he dipped his arrows in it. You drift past stables that reeked of filth older than some kingdoms. Heracles turned rivers to clean them, but who washed the rivers when they ran black with the king's hidden sins? A soft joke lingers, even the greatest muscle can't lift guilt that sticks to the soul like wet straw. It's said he stood alone on that riverbank after the last filth floated away, whispering apologies to the currents. No marble statue tells you about the children, his own blood on his hands, a madness sent by Hera that no labor could scrub clean. Historians remain divided on whether the labors were penance or punishment, or simply busy work for a man too dangerous to leave idle. You stand among the echoes of these questions, hearing Heracles' breath heavier than any beast he fought. Tonight you sense him crouched by the lion's pelt, rough hands, gripping a club, worn smooth by monsters and regrets alike. The legends want you to see a giant unbending and victorious. But in this quiet space, it's just you, and a man who could break the earth in half and still lose sleep over what the cracks swallowed. Listen for the hush. The regrets are not loud. They creep like ivy over statues, soft and patient. And as your eyelids grow heavy, maybe you see that no hero's labor is ever truly finished. Betrayals rarely roar. They rustle behind closed doors, slip beneath silk sheets, and cling to the corners of songs half forgotten. Now, lean closer to Theseus, the clever prince whose labyrinth victory made him a hero, but whose trail of discarded hearts makes him something else entirely. Before the Minotaur's blood dried in Crete, Theseus was already weaving new knots, knots of promises whispered in moonlit halls, then sliced clean when daylight came. He didn't just slay beasts. He abandoned queens and sisters, kings and kind strangers each left, clutching a fading echo of his vow. Some scholars debate whether Theseus was Greece's greatest trickster, rivaling even Odysseus in the art of quiet ruin. Take Ariadne, princess of Crete, his thread through the labyrinth, her heartbeat tangled in his. One dawn, she woke to the sea's hush, and no sails on the horizon, only waves that whispered her name and a crown that sank like a stone. Some stories claim Dionysus found her sobbing on Naxos's shore and turned her tears into constellations. Others say she simply learned to stop waiting for sails. Then there's Phaedra, Ariadne's sister, lured into Theseus's life, as if fate wanted one betrayal to echo louder than the last. Her love story splintered into tragedy accusations, and a boy named Hippolytus left shattered beneath hooves he never saw coming. Historians argue which twist of this myth is true. Did Phaedra love him, hate him, or both? Theseus's footprints vanish where the truth muddies. He wasn't cruel in the obvious sense. No monsters for him to wrestle in these betrayals. No claws or poisoned fangs. Just soft words, sharp exits. Even the Amazons fell for his promises. Hippolyta Queen, among warriors, bore him a son, and watched him carry her legacy back to Athens, only to twist her name into rumors when it suited his politics. Some scrolls say Hippolyta died on Attic soil, speared in a battle she never chose. Others suggest she drifted away, like Ariadne, lost to the tides of his ambition. There's an overlooked tale where Theseus tricked the city of Eleusis into peace talks, then slaughtered his hosts during the festival feast. An old joke among Athenian elders said you could trust Theseus to win your war, but never your daughter's heart. His betrayals are footnotes in heroic poems, overshadowed by the labyrinth and the monster's roar. But if you listen here, where the olive groves whisper at dusk, you'll hear them soft footsteps retreating before dawn. Some scholars insist Theseus's betrayals were just politics, clever survival in a kingdom of shifting alliances. Others wonder if he simply couldn't bear to stand still. The restless hunger of a man who found more comfort in conquest than commitment. There's no single answer, only shadows where lovers once waited for his return. Imagine drifting through Athens at night, the Acropolis, moonlit and silent. Somewhere in the dark, Ariadne's ghost wraps a thread around your wrist, not to guide you out, but to remind you what it costs to follow a hero home. If your thoughts feel tangled tonight, blame Theseus. He's the reason some knots never come undone. And if you wake with a whisper of betrayal curling in your dreams, remember sometimes the monsters stay slain, but the heartbreak grows new heads when you're not looking. Quiet now. Perseus never liked his enemies loud. He preferred to let them linger in the shadows, just out of reach of the marble tales told by poets and temple carvings. You stand beside him now, not as he lifts Medusa's head in triumph, but in the hush that follows when the monsters are gone and new ones breathe behind his back. Picture him, younger than the statues, amidst sandals slick with sea spray, a polished bronze shield, catching glimpses of his own reflection more often than his enemies did. Some scholars argue Perseus's greatest rival was the mirror itself, every monster a reflection, every victory breeding a hidden feud. There's no scholarly consensus on whether he feared his enemies more than he feared what his own legend would demand next. Medusa's head turned rivals to stone kings, sea beasts, rude dinner guests who forgot to bow. But the real threat was softer old warriors who resented a boy favored by God's soldiers in back corridors, whispering that Perseus's mother had won him Olympus's pity with tears instead of prayers. A hero blessed with divine tools, Hermes's winged sandals, Athena's mirror shield, Hades's helm of darkness was always suspect among mortals who had only calloused hands and rusted swords. In the shadows of Seriphos, there's talk of a fisherman who taught Perseus how to knot nets strong enough to drag sea monsters ashore. Some say the fisherman's sons cursed Perseus when he left the island, taking stories and spoils, but leaving empty nets behind. These tiny grudges slip through the cracks of marble heroism. No bard sings of them, but they rot the base of statues just the same. Andromeda's rescue, so dramatic in paintings, was quieter in the myths that didn't survive the chisel. Yes, Perseus freed her from the rock, but what chains did she slip on afterward? A queen by marriage tethered to a man who carried a head that never stopped hissing even in sleep. Some scrolls hint that Andromeda's family never forgave Perseus for making them footnotes in a story that swallowed kingdoms whole. Historians still debate whether Perseus ever feared another monster after Medusa, or if he simply created new ones, enemies hidden in banquet halls and among the sharp smiles of future kings. A king himself, in the end they say, though the crown sat uneasy on his brow. In taverns by the sea, old sailors whisper that Perseus's final enemy was time a creeping rot, that no blade could cut down a silence that no Gorgon's gaze could petrify. There's a quirky tale too small for epic poets, that Perseus once argued with a farmer over a goat stolen by palace guards. The hero returned the goat, but not the guards who quietly resented him ever after. Tiny sparks in a tinderbox kingdom, silent enemies that gather in the hush between legends. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine that hush. The faint clink of bronze against stone sandals scuffing a palace corridor where no monsters lurk, but plenty wear human faces. Listen for the ghosts of those who waited in Perseus's blind spots, men and women turned to stone by neglect, not magic. If the Gorgon's head turned enemies to statues, then these silent rivals turned Perseus into one too, a legend frozen in time, surrounded by shadows that never blink. Should you drift toward sleep, with one eye half open, remember some heroes defeat monsters you'll never see, but the whispers they leave behind. Those can keep you company until dawn. Steel your senses now. Achilles waits for no trumpet's call tonight. Instead, you find him far from Troy's smoky shores in the quiet corners, where armor clatters to the ground, and the only war left is the one that flickers behind his eyelids. Here, you'll see the mortal fears that history's poets rarely dared to hum over their lyres. Picture him, young softer than the bronze Greaves would have you believe Peleus's boy, Thetis's secret. A mother dipped him in the Styx to seal his skin like iron, but left that famous heel dry as an olive branch in drought. Historians disagree whether she wept when she saw the flaw, or if she trusted her son's speed to outrun any arrow. Some scholars even argue there was never a river, only a mother's whispered curse. Achilles' greatest terror wasn't a spear, it was obscurity. The fates offered him two roads, a long life in the shadows, or a short blaze etched forever into memory. But no one carved a statue of the choice, only the consequence. You find him now, in the lull between battles, knees, bent at the sea's edge, head bowed to a tide that knows all heroes' names, but never keeps them for long. There's an overlooked scrap of myth where Achilles begged his mother for a disguise, a merchant's cloak, a fisherman's oiled hands, anything to slip past the summons to Troy. She hid him on Ceros, among daughters of kings, a boy with soft braids and softer footsteps. Some say he laughed there free of prophecies and death songs. Others insist his heart beat too loud for silk slippers to hush. Scholars still debate whether it was love or fear that lured him out Odysseus's trick with a trumpet and a spear hidden among girlish trinkets. When the call came, Achilles flinched, not from the promise of blood, but from the tug of fame's barbed hook. Quirky detail, when he donned his armor again, they say he kissed the silk goodbye, folding it into his pack like a talisman of what might have been. On the plains of Troy, he moved like thunder, disguised as a man. But even thunder rolls away. His tent was a hush between storms inside. He whispered to Patroclus about the warmth of Phthia, the gentle shade of fig trees untouched by bronze and bone. Some say Patroclus was his shield from dread, a heartbeat that made death's footfalls lighter. Historians remain divided on whether their bond was brotherhood love or something older than either word. Listen closer. The night before, Hector fell. Achilles wept into the sand. Not for his doomed friend, not yet, but for the echo of his own ending carried on the winds from Olympus. He knew he'd chased a death that had been waiting at his cradle. You sense him standing ankle-deep in surf salt, burning the wound that would one day find its mark. His final fear was not the arrow Paris's coward shot, guided by Apollo's whisper. It was that the world would remember only the rage and not the trembling boy behind the shield. Imagine him now, drifting somewhere between the roar of battle and the hush of a mother's lullaby, both fading under the weight of marble myths. Should your eyelids flutter shut with Achilles' secret grief pressed softly behind them, hold this close, even the mightiest heel can stumble when fear sits at the bone's root. And somewhere beyond the Iliad's last line, a ghost hums lullabies to drown out the clash of bronze. Listen, do you hear it? The hush of Ithaca's shores, where Odysseus stands not as the wily king returned, but as a man still tangled in the gods' grudges. Tonight you walk where curses linger, like old cobwebs in a palace no victory ever truly cleaned. When the last suitor's blood dried on cold stone floors, you'd think peace came easily. Odysseus home, at last Penelope's loom finally at rest. But listen closer. Each corner of that grand hall holds a hex whispered by a god or monster left unsatisfied. Some scholars insist that Odysseus's trials did not end at sea. They only shifted from Poseidon's waves to silent threats rustling through olive groves and kitchen corridors. One lesser-known tale says a single drop of Polyphemus's blood seeped into the soil where Odysseus docked his ship. Some islanders swear the soil never yielded olives again, as if the Cyclops' last roar took root beneath the roots. Quirky detail farmers still tap the ground there and claim they hear a groan if the season's harvest looks too rich. Circe's island drifted behind him, but some say a strand of her hair knotted itself into his cloak's hem. Wives of sailors told stories of Odysseus's eyes going glassy at random, seeing visions of Circe's garden blooming, where no orchard should grow. Historians remain split. Was it longing guilt, or a curse that made him mutter her name under his breath when he thought no one was near? Then there's the rumor of the sirens, those sweet-voiced fates he claimed to have conquered with wax and rope. In some forgotten versions, the sirens never forgave him for slipping their trap. They nested in his dreams, instead, humming secrets only Penelope would hear when his sleep turned restless. Some scholars argue whether this was just the sea's echo or a hex that turned whispers into mistrust. The palace itself felt it rooms that creaked, where no breeze should reach shadows that lingered too long behind the throne. Telemachus, grown tall, sometimes flinched at night when footsteps padded through dark hallways that no servant claimed. It's said that when Odysseus spoke of peace, his hand always gripped his sword as if the walls might answer him back. There's a soft, half-buried myth that even Athena, his fierce protector, tired of his tricks. Some scrolls hint she cursed his last years with small confusions, mismatched sandals, a forgotten name here and there, tiny cracks that chipped away at the cunning mind Troy once feared. Historians still debate if this was mercy or punishment, a goddess's final reminder that mortals who play at godhood rarely retire peacefully. Picture him now at dawn, alone, on Ithaca's rocky cliffs. The sea stretches flat and forgiving, but behind him, the house murmurs with all he can't outrun. Some days, he wonders if he should have stayed drifting a ghost among the waves, forever lost, but never trapped, in a place where peace feels like a cage padded with old grudges. If you lean close to the waves tonight, you might hear him, Odysseus, king of cunning, asking the surf what more it wants to take. Should you drift off beside him, know this: some voyages never truly end. They just drop anchor in the quietest parts of your mind, whispering tales of hexes and homecomings that taste more like storms than shorelines. And when the wind shifts over your blanket, maybe you'll feel it too. That itch of salt and secrets, a soft reminder that even kings come home, only to find the gods waiting with one last knot to untangle. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the creak of a ship's timber splitting under dreams, too golden to hold. Jason, hero of the Argonauts, sits adrift tonight in the quiet that comes after ambition frays each plank of his once glorious vessel, soaked in salt and old regrets. You know the headline version: a bold sailor chasing the golden fleece, a crew of legends at his back, Medea's dark magic lighting the path. But here in this softer corner of myth, Jason's story unravels strand by strand, dreams that snapped like frayed rope when no one was looking. Some scholars still argue whether Jason's quest was bravery or foolish pride wrapped in hero's laurels. Picture Jason at the prow, hair stiff with sea salt eyes, fixed on horizons that never brought him the peace he promised his crew. For all the monsters slain and labyrinthine rivers crossed, the true monster waited in his own bed, Medea, who stitched herself to his fate with spells and whispers that promised victory at a cost he never read closely enough. Quirky detail buried in a half-lost papyrus. Some versions claim Jason had nightmares of the fleece long after it hung limp in his palace gold, turned to ash in his sleep, whispering betrayal into the linen folds of his pillow. The fleece was never just wool. It was proof that he could seize what others feared to touch. And proof, too, that some treasures demand blood, sometimes your own. Historians puzzle over the seams of this myth. Was it Jason's betrayal of Medea, or Medea's revenge, that unraveled the dream? Surviving scraps argue both ways: a hero too quick to abandon the witch who won him kingdoms, or a woman so bound to dark oaths that his future could only burn when she let go. There's no consensus, only drifting ash where a palace once stood. Long after Colchis faded behind him, Jason found no harbor in his own city. The people he'd promised golden ages to whispered about broken deals and spilled royal blood. Some say he roamed the palace halls at night, trailing fingers over empty thrones that once held promises thicker than fleece. When he looked into his son's eyes, he saw Medea's reflection waiting unblinking. An odd twist. The bards rarely sing. Jason died beneath the rotting hull of the Argo itself. He lay beneath its crumbling stern for shade one afternoon, and the ship he'd once captained to triumph cracked and dropped a beam square across his heart. Some claim it was the gods collecting debts. With quiet irony, a hero crushed by his own ambition turned to driftwood. If you stand close enough to that wreck, you can almost hear it groan in the tide planks, whispering tales of oaths broken and dreams that never found safe harbor. A king who thought he could outrun fate, only to find it waiting in splintered boards and a lover's ghost. So as you drift deeper into tonight's hush, imagine Jason's last vision, the mast above him, creaking like a cradle's lullaby. No fleece, no kingdom, just the soft hush of waves folding over an unmoored dream. Some heroes burn bright. Others simply drift apart, piece by golden piece. And should your mind wander tonight, may it wander kindly, remembering that even the boldest quests can end not with monsters slain, but with silence where a promise used to be. There's a hush in the woods tonight, where Atalanta's footprints used to press the earthlight as a doze, quick as gossip, through an ancient court. Here's a hero who outran kings and monsters alike, only to find that speed can't outrun the quiet retributions hidden in a single vow left unbroken. You see her first, not at the starting line of some royal foot race, but in the cradle of a forest where her father left her to die. Raised by a bear, they say her lullabies, the growls of a she-bear's throat, her cradle, the hollow roots of an oak. Some scholars puzzle over how much of this is myth, and how much was whispered by hunters, too slow to catch her shadow. There's no tidy answer, just paw prints and half-told tales. Atalanta's legend gleams brightest at the racetrack suitors lined up like dominoes, each man certain he'd win her hand by outrunning the woman who never lost. And each man fell panting, clutching knees in the dust, hearts pounding from the shame of trailing behind a woman who bent no knee to marriage or crown. Then came Hippomenes with his pockets full of golden apples, Aphrodite's sly trick. 1 toss, 2 tosses, 3. Atalanta fleet of foot, tripped up by glitter she'd never asked for. Some call it cunning, others betrayal, wrapped in divine meddling. Historians still argue whether she let herself lose, if deep inside she wondered whether any race could truly free her from the word wife. Quirky detail hidden in the older scrolls, the orchard where Hippomenes plucked those apples never bore fruit again. Locals said it soured the soil roots knotted by the echo of a promise Atalanta had never wanted to break. And so, her freedom ended at a finish line lined with petals and whispers. Yet her lost lineage runs deeper than that single race. In some versions, her son Parthenopaeus fought and died at Thebes. His courage just another branch on a tree, no one traced back to a mother who'd once sworn she'd never bend. Generations rippled outward, quiet retributions in the shape of short-lived heirs and unlucky hunts. Some scholars remain divided on whether the gods cursed her for defying them, or blessed her with a legacy too swift to catch. Picture her now, pacing the edges of an abandoned track at dusk. Wind tangles her hair like the old bear's breath used to do. Somewhere, the echo of her footfalls keeps the dust from ever settling. Some nights, farmers swear they see her a flicker of a shadow, sprinting the orchard's edge too quick for mortal eyes too stubborn to stop. It's said the goddess Artemis still keeps Atalanta close, a favored huntress, forever unwed among the wilds. In your drifting thoughts tonight, you might sense her brush past you, warm breeze on your cheek, the ghost of a challenge in the hush. If you listen closer, you'll hear the soft thrum of feet that never truly lost a race, only traded one finish line for another. And if dreams pull you into hidden forests tonight, let Atalanta's footsteps guide you deeper past traps and golden bribes through glades where no vows bind your ankles. Here you run with her free, for just a breath longer than any legend dared promise. Some heroes fight monsters, some outrun them. But Atalanta, she proved the hardest monster to leave behind might be the promise you once made to yourself, swift, wild, and just out of reach. Up here, where the wind keens thin and cold, you might glimpse Bellerophon once more, arms wrapped tight around Pegasus's neck, eyes squinting at Olympus's glittering edge. He rose higher than most heroes dared, but tonight you'll follow the quiet descent where pride turns to silence and a winged dream folds its feathers for good. He began on the ground, like any mortal, a prince with too much fate knotted in his veins. Some say his name means Slayer of Belleros, an enemy whose story sank beneath Bellerophon's own ascent. Historians disagree about who Belleros was, an insulted rival, a king's guard, or just a convenient stepping stone for a legend bound for the clouds. Picture Bellerophon's fingers tangled in Pegasus's mane knuckles, pale with ambition. Quirky detail, the bridle he used was woven with Athena's own hair, a token spun from a goddess's indulgence. Few mortals ever earned a winged steed, fewer still survived the ride. He chased the chimera, that fire-belching lion-goat serpent that gnawed at Lycia's edges. And he won. Of course, heroes always do at first. But victory is a hungry thing. When the chimera's ashes scattered to the winds, Bellerophon's eyes drifted upward past mortal thrones and mountain peaks, straight to Zeus's marble gates. Some scrolls say he never meant to knock, only to peek. Others insist he demanded a seat at the godly table, a mortal's ambition, wedged where only immortals sat. Scholars still debate if it was arrogance or accidental audacity. No consensus, just feathers drifting where thunderclouds gathered. The gods, amused, at first grew quiet. Pegasus bucked when Olympus's gates flashed gold in the sun. Some versions claim Zeus sent a gadfly to sting the winged horse mid-flight. A single buzz, a sharp pain, a skyward dream clipped like a bird's wing. Bellerophon tumbled down earth, rushing up in a hush that drowned out any prayers he might have flung after Pegasus's receding shadow. Odd rumor, a lonely olive tree near Tarsus still leans at an angle said to match the hero's fall. Locals tie ribbons to its bent trunk, tiny bribes to keep their own pride from growing wings it can't control. Some nights the wind rattles those ribbons like feathers, remembering how high they once soared. He didn't die on impact, though the fall should have split every bone. Instead, Bellerophon rose again, limping half lame, shunned by kings, who once feasted him for tales of monsters slain. He wandered plains no bard cared to immortalize, mumbling, to shadows forever reaching for rains that never brushed his calloused palms again. Historians whisper that he built a small hut far from any road. Travelers sometimes spotted a weathered man standing in a field, arms outstretched as if still cradling a phantom neck of wings and wind. Was it madness or memory that made him look skyward? Each dusk, no scroll dares a final answer. Imagine him now, Pegasus grazing on Olympus's far side, free, unbridled, no mortal weight dragging him down. And Bellerophon, a faint figure on dusty earth, tracing wing patterns in the dirt, with a stick, each line erased by the next breeze. Pride gave him wings, punishment clipped them, and silence wrapped the rest. Tonight, as you drift, picture that hush, where ambition rises just high enough to taste heaven before settling into the soft, forgetful grass below. Some heroes burn out in battle. Bellerophon's downfall was quieter, a single buzzing sting, and a dream left hovering out of reach. So if your mind ever wanders skyward on restless nights, remember sometimes the loftiest heights end not with thunder, but with a hush so soft it carries you straight into sleep. Lean in. If you listen closely, you'll hear the faintest pluck of a lyre somewhere deep in the shadows. That's Orpheus for you, the bard who could coax stones to weep and trees to dance. Yet tonight, he sits silent, his second grief tucked away where myths don't often linger. Everyone remembers the first silence, how he charmed the underworld's iron gates, how even Hades and Persephone paused to let him lead Eurydice back toward breath and sun. But the twist, you know he looked back too soon. One glance gone. The poets immortalize that. What they often leave out is what echoed after when his music lost its echo, and his feet found no place warm enough for his songs to nest. Some scraps of parchment hint that Orpheus never strummed the same after that. He wandered forests so thick with hush that even his lyre's strings dulled against pine bark. Scholars still argue if he gave up singing to punish himself or to spite the gods who taught him hope only to snatch it away. No one agrees. Maybe Orpheus liked it that way. Some truths bloom better in shadow. A curious detail tucked into Thracian tales. Villagers claimed that long after Orpheus vanished, their dogs would whimper at certain clearings where no birds dared nest. They swore the soil hummed if you pressed your ear to the ground, a tune so low and mournful it set teeth on edge. Was it wind roots or the ghost of strings plucked once for love lost twice? Some say he drifted north, past riverbanks slick with reeds and night whispers, where he taught stones to remember lullabies. A handful of wandering shepherds still claim they hear his songs just before dawn, soft notes curling through fog like an old grief no morning sun can dry. There's a scrap of myth that Orpheus tried to open the underworld's doors a second time, not with song, but with silence. He lay flat among gravestones, willing himself into shadow, hoping that if he quieted every heartbeat, Eurydice might slip through the veil on her own. Historians remain divided on whether he was ever found. Some say Maenads tore him apart furious. He withheld his music. Others claim he dissolved into a tree's roots, each ring a new verse no mortal ear can hear. Picture him now on a mossy hill, lyre across his knees, fingers grazing strings, but never pressing. A single note might wake the grief again, so he lets the hush carry it instead. Some nights, if you drift near that hill in dreams, you might feel him beside you. Breath warm as dusk, voice a hum you almost catch before it slides behind your pulse. Odd rumor, there's a glade in Thrace where couples swear they see flickers of a man pacing just beyond lantern light. Newlyweds say vows there, hoping Orpheus's hush blesses their promises to never look back too soon. Old villagers leave him offerings of fresh string, a handful of honeycombed tiny bribes to keep their secrets from dissolving like his. If tonight's quiet wraps too close, listen for the ghost of his second silence, more forgiving than the first, softer a lullaby that never demands you face the underworld's gates. Some songs lose their words, but not their warmth. And as your eyes drift shut, imagine Orpheus's fingers brushing your shoulder, just a gentle tap to remind you that even if you lose something, Once its echo can carry you further than any torchlit path. Do you feel that warmth, that sudden flicker just behind your ribs? That's Meliger's flame, small enough to cup in a mother's palm, fierce enough to decide when a hero's story ends. Tonight you'll stand by the hearth, where one log burned too long, and a future turned to ashes before the crown could settle on his head. Meliger's tale isn't as loud as Achilles' rage or Theseus's betrayals. It smolders instead, a quiet ember at the edge of Greek myth. When he was born, the fates pointed to a fresh log crackling in the family fire. As long as that wood survived, so would the boy. His mother, Althea, knew this secret, her lullabies thick with the scent of charred oak. Some scholars argue whether she wept with relief or dread when she hid the log away. Historians still debate, did she hope to trick the fates, or only buy herself time to hold her son close? Quirky rumor, villagers whispered that the log sometimes hissed at night as if protesting its stolen years. Servants claimed Althea would wake at odd hours to check the embers, running fingers over its rough bark as if feeling for Meleager's heartbeat under her nails. When Meleager grew, the Caledonian boar stalked the countryside, a beast sent by Artemis to punish a king's slight. Meleager led the hunt, blood-pounding wild spear flashing under oak boughs. Among the hunters stood Atalanta, fleet-footed bowstring, humming like a heartbeat in tune with his own. Some scrolls say Meleager killed the boar. Others whisper Atalanta's arrow struck first. Historians love to argue the order. Either way, envy found its mark. The trophy hide became a wedge in a family already splintering. Meleager's uncles bristled at the thought of spoils shared with a woman. Voices rose, knives flashed, and somewhere in that chaos, a mother's fear curled in on itself, like smoke trapped in a sealed jar. Althea's final choice ripples through half-burned parchment scraps. Some say she saw her son's blood on the floor and remembered that hidden log waiting like a curse fulfilled. Some versions claim her grief turned to rage when her brothers fell by Meleager's hand. No scholarly consensus, just a flicker of flame and a mother's whisper as she dropped the log back into the hearth. Picture her there, cloak pulled tight, the smell of burning bark crowding the room. Meleager's pulse sputtered somewhere in the boar's shadow, while the log cracked and hissed, embers leaping like dying sparks in his eyes. The fates didn't need thunderbolts or hydra heads for this hero, just a hearth, a mother's shaking hands, and a silence that spread through Caledon like smoke under a door. Odd detail tucked in some rural myths. Villagers say no hearth in Caledon ever burned quite right afterward. Flames sputter when you least expect, logs collapse into ash too soon, as if Meleager's spirit lingers to remind them how fragile warmth can be. Now you find him here tonight, sitting at the edge of that hearth, watching the coals with a half smile. Maybe he wonders if the boar was ever really the monster. Maybe he'd tell you the true beast was a mother's dread, curled tighter than any tusk. Some nights, the hush of those coals might echo your own heartbeat, soft, steady, yet carrying the weight of choices you never meant to make. So if you drift off beside Meleager's embers tonight, let them warm you, just enough to remember some heroes burn bright on battlefields. Others flicker out quietly in the place they once called home. Lean closer to the hum of wings and the hush of wax, because tonight you stand not beside Icarus, whose melted feathers everyone mourns, but beside his father, Daedalus, the master craftsman, the ingenious builder, who carved labyrinths from limestone and tragedy from good intentions. Here in the soft shadows of his workshop, grief curls like wood shavings at his feet. They tell you Icarus fell sky too close, sun too greedy, wings too fragile. But what about Daedalus left behind on a lonely shore, with salt in his hair and a son's name caught in his throat? Some scholars say Daedalus wept only once, then dried his eyes on blueprints for traps no man could escape. Others insist he built all his inventions as apologies he knew no god would ever accept. Quirky detail tucked away in an old scroll. It said Daedalus's workshop smelled not of sawdust, but of honey. Bees hovered in his rafters, drawn to the wax that sealed every seam of those doomed wings. Each drone a whisper that the sky might not forgive him for daring to give a boy flight. Before the wings, there was the labyrinth twisting stone, and torchlight, a prison for the Minotaur, and quietly for Daedalus himself. He designed it so cunningly that even he sometimes lost his bearings among the turns. Historians puzzle over whether the maze was truly meant for the beast or for the king, who needed something to fear more than rebellion. Some say Daedalus laid the first stone with dread, humming in his bones. Knowledge that once a path bends too many times, even its maker forgets where it ends. When the maze turned to a prison, for him and Icarus, the craftsman's mind turned skyward, threads of wax and feathers, where blueprints once held only stone. Some stories say he begged Icarus to heed his warnings, not too high, not too low. But the sea wind snatched those words from father to son long before the sun did its melting work. In the quiet years after Daedalus drifted through foreign courts, building fountains and puppet theaters, small wonders that never quite lifted the ache under his ribs, a rumor clings to his legend that he carved a wooden boy in Crete's forests, each joint so perfect it wept when the wind rattled its frame. Some scholars dismiss it as a fairy tale grafted onto an old grief. Others insist that if you listen at dusk, the puppet still whispers Icarus's name to the cypresses. Imagine him now, hunched over a workbench slick with candlelight. His hands move without pause, new hinges, new locks, new riddles, to keep grief from pooling too close to his eyes. Daedalus could sculpt wings, trap beasts fool kings, yet here sits a man who could not keep one boy from flying where fathers fear to follow. In an island village, fishermen swear they see him sometimes. At dawn, an old man pacing the tide line, sketching wings in wet sand only for the tide to steal them back. A quiet ritual, an unspoken apology, replayed each morning with no one but the gulls to witness. If your eyelids flutter tonight as you drift toward sleep, imagine Daedalus at your bedside palm, outstretched but empty of feathers or wax. No more tricks, no more escape routes, just a quiet man hoping his son might glide past the sun's teeth this time. And when the hush settles over, you remember some labyrinths are built of stone, but the hardest ones to escape are made of love, and the echoes of wings that never learned when to turn for home. There's a hush on the salt breeze tonight, sharp with the tang of sea spray, and the faint ache of old wounds that never learned how to close. This is where you'll find Philoctetes, not the fresh-faced hero who once held Heracles' bow, but the bitter castaway who learned that victory can feel like poison when there's no one left to share the triumph. It began with a snake bite, simple if you squint. On the way to Troy, a coiled fang found Philoctetes' foot on a lonely island stop. Infection spread blood, soured, and the stench turned his shipmates' stomachs faster than any battle cry. Some scholars still argue whether Odysseus himself gave the order to abandon him on Lemnos's rocky shores. Others say the whole crew pretended not to hear him plead from the sand as sails swallowed the horizon. Odd rumor, tucked in local tales, Old fishermen claim the spot where Philoctetes lay still stinks of herbs he mashed against his wound, bitter leaves that couldn't quiet the rot. Even now, they say goats avoid grazing there, as if his resentment still seeps into the roots. Years crept by. His only companions were gulls and ghosts of ships that never anchored. The bow Heracles' final gift lay across his lap each dusk, like a promise he couldn't fire at his own misfortune. It said he talked to it the way you might mutter at a stubborn lock or a kettle that won't boil. Some scrolls hint that Heracles' ghost answered, urging him to wait to believe the world would remember its debts eventually. Eventually came crawling in the shape of Greek envoys, Odysseus, again clever tongue, ready with apologies dipped in necessity. Troy's walls would not crumble without Philoctetes' poisoned arrows. The same captains who gagged at his wounds years before now knelt in island sand pleading for the bow that would tip the war in their favor. Historians remain split. Did Philoctetes forgive them in that moment, or simply savor the bitter irony that their victory depended on the same rot they once fled? There's no scholarly consensus, only a handful of lines from lost plays that show him spitting curses even as he limped aboard their polished decks. When Troy burned, its ashes stuck to his bandages. No bard sang of the smell that clung to him, after the reek of old pus and fresh smoke woven together like a victory wreath no one wanted to touch. He fired the arrow that felled Paris, some say, an act that should have gilded his name alongside Achilles and Odysseus. Yet in the stories whispered around hearths, Philoctetes is mostly a footnote, the wounded man, the island ghost, the hero too bitter to sit comfortably among marble statues. A quirky local custom persists near the ruins of Lemnos. Sailors leave broken arrows on the cliffs where he once watched the tide for ships that wouldn't come. They say it keeps the bitterness at bay, that if you don't acknowledge Philoctetes' grudge, the sea has a way of swallowing your luck whole. Picture him now, perched at the island's highest rock bow, balanced across scarred knees. He stares at the horizon, half expecting a new fleet to appear, this time needing him for some fresh war. Maybe he'd laugh teeth bared to the wind, the taste of salt, and old betrayals mixing on his tongue. If you drift off tonight with that image lodged in your mind, remember, Philoctetes' wounds, that fester longer than any battle, a bow strung tight with resentment and a quiet promise that some exiles never really come home. They just wait, bitter patient certain, that sooner or later the world circles back to what it once abandoned on a rocky shore. Step softly now. Some stories slip through the cracks of marble temples and thunderous tragedies, whispering only when no one's left to listen. Here on the rough path that winds beyond Thebes' crumbling gates, you'll find Oedipus not as a riddle breaker or a king undone by his own questions, but as a ghost of exile feet, dusted in silence, crown traded for a walking stick, and a hush that even the fates can't untangle. You know the pieces, the Sphinx undone by a single answer, a mother's gasp behind palace curtains, eyes torn from sockets when the truth clawed its way out. But what the poets rarely hum over their lyres is what came after, when Oedipus's last footsteps faded past the city stones that once rang with his name. Some scholars say he wandered blind yet unbowed, led by Antigone's soft hands along goat tracks and forgotten shrines. Others argue he was more rumor than man a riddle in human shape, drifting from one village's pity to the next. There's no consensus where he truly laid his head. Each night, only flickers of rumor that he never slept beneath the same fig tree twice. A curious detail buried in the folds of old scrolls in Colonus, a grove where Oedipus is said to have ended his wandering villagers, swear the olive trees still bend slightly inward, leaning over the dusty spot where he knelt in his last hush. They say the ground there hums at dusk if you press your ear to the roots, a soft echo of questions no oracle could answer. Odd rumor, too. Some versions claim Oedipus never cursed the gods who laid his trap. He cursed knowledge itself. He taught his daughters that answers taste like honey at first lick, but rot the tongue the longer they stay. Historians still debate whether this is mere poetic garnish, or if somewhere in the hush of a ruined shrine he really did speak those words to the night. Imagine him, now clothed in coarse wool, one hand brushing the bark of a gnarled oak. He has no throne, no marble likeness gleaming under temple lamps. Only a staff worn smooth by miles, and a name carried more like a bruise than a crown. The people he passes sometimes bow in fear, more often in pity. Yet a few quiet farmers and roadside beggars offer him shelter for the night, a sip of wine bread warm from their hearth. They too know what it is to bear truths too sharp to hold. Some say that at the end, when thunder curled low over Colonus, Oedipus smiled an expression soft as dusk rain. A final gift to Antigone, a death unmarked by spectacle, no hero's pyre, no festival chants. Just the hush of wind threading through olive leaves, and the faint warmth of a daughter's hand pressed against his. There's a half-lost fragment that suggests he vanished, rather than dyed bones, folding into the soil so cleanly that no grave remained to gather weeds. Some scholars argue this was the god's final mercy. Others insist it was the last joke in a life twisted around riddles no man should have solved. If your thoughts drift tonight to doorways that promise more answers than comfort, remember Oedipus walking blind, yet sure-footed through the hush. Sometimes the greatest exile isn't from home, but from certainty, an unseen country, where the only guide is a question you never needed to ask. And if you listen close, the hush that follows your breath might carry his footsteps soft, steady, and unseen king, who traded answers for silence that even time can't undo. Quiet your breath for this one. Antigone stands not on the palace steps tonight, but at the threshold of a grave she chose herself. In the hush between decree and defiance, you'll find her not shouting rebellion to the gods, but brushing dust from her brother's skin, with hands softer than marble ever dared carve. Her myth is loud, when thundered on stage a king's edict, an unburied corpse, a sister's stubborn spine. But in the creases, where the chorus falls silent, there's a gentler defiance, an echo of loyalty that whispered even when the world roared, no. Historians still debate whether Antigone was reckless or righteous martyr or nuisance. There's no neat answer, just the hush of dirt falling on forbidden flesh. Picture her in the pale dawn robes, damp with earth's breath. Her brother, Polynices, enemy of the state blood of her blood, lies half buried under a sky that pretends not to watch. Some versions say she worked by moonlight, one handful of soil at a time, her shoulders shaking not with fear, but with quiet prayers to no particular god. Others argue it was midday, bold as a torch, her eyes locked with guards who pretended not to see. Scholars argue over the hour, none argue the dust was real. A curious scrap of local rumor claims that when she was led away to her stone tomb, her palms were still lined with grains of earth she never brushed off. Villagers swear that soil sprouted weeds along her path, tiny green rebellions that refused to bow under sandals or king's boots. Quirky detail buried in rural shrines in certain corners of Greece, it's custom to scatter 3 pinches of soil over a grave that isn't your own, an echo of Antigone's gesture, a promise that silence is not always submission. No official altar bears her name, yet her story lingers in every hush. When family stands over a body the law says must not lie at rest. Some say that in her final moments, sealed in that stone cave, Antigone sang to the shadows no defiant battle hymn, but a lullaby, learned from a mother she barely remembered. Historians remain split. Was it despair or serenity that carried her voice until the air turned stale? There's no consensus, only fragments of lines caught in drafts, where the tomb cracked just enough to let her voice slip out and braid itself into the wind. Imagine her now, not as a tragic statue, but as a girl resting her cheek against cool stone. Her eyes closed, her breath slow, as moss creeping over unmarked graves. She does not tremble at the king's wrath, only at the thought that no one might remember the softness under her stubbornness, a defiance not of swords, but of silence. Some families even now pass her name around dinner tables in the hush after an argument, an unspoken nod to the one who reminded them that loyalty sometimes means stepping past the line everyone else fears to cross. In small gardens, grandmothers hush restless children by telling them about Antigone, who turned dust into an act of gentle war. Tonight, as your own thoughts settle into the hush behind your eyelids, think of her fingers brushing away the last sign of state and law, leaving only the clean truth of blood and soil. No grand army stood behind her, only the quiet certainty that love buried right is stronger than any crown polished bright. And if you wake in the night, wondering whether softness can stand its ground, remember her Antigone, pressing dust to skin in the quiet hours, proving sometimes the boldest shout is a whisper no decree can silence. Listen, hear that last faint echo. It's the hush that swallows the footsteps of heroes, whose names never made it into temple hymns or marble friezes. Tonight you stand at the edge of forgotten paths, where minor myths flicker out like candle wicks no poet cared to shield from the wind. These are the echoes of doomed quests, whispers of courage that slipped through cracks while greater legends feasted on the world's applause. Somewhere in a tangle of olive branches, a young man once vowed to steal an apple from the sacred grove of the Hesperides, just one more echo of Heracles' triumph. His name lost to moth-eaten scrolls, his bones never carried home. Some villagers swear the trees still shiver when storms roll, in a reminder that ambition left alone in the dark is easy prey for the gods' gentle indifference. Or think of that nameless sailor who swore he'd chase the siren's song long after Odysseus plugged his crew's ears with wax. No king, no cunning to guide him, only a heart too empty of fear, too full of hunger for something more than salt spray and stars. They found his boat splintered on a reef, but the song, some say, still clings to the waves, humming just out of reach for fishermen who lean too far over their nets. Historians rarely linger here. They prefer the bold brushstrokes of Perseus's marble or Theseus's labyrinthine tales. But if you kneel by an old campfire pit in a forest clearing, you might feel the warmth of a forgotten scout, one who never came back from warning a band of heroes about an ambush that made someone else famous. His name erased, his courage a ghost pressed into tree bark that no one thinks to read. A quirky rumor whispers that near old Theban roads, travelers sometimes stumble on an ancient helmet half buried in mud, too battered for a museum, too stubborn to sink entirely. Some swear if you hold it close, you'll hear faint breaths, like someone still waiting for the battle cry that never came. Scholars sometimes puzzle over scraps fragments of pottery, etched with half-names lines of verse, ending mid-syllable, a spearhead tangled in reeds far from any battlefield. No consensus forms, only gentle nods that history isn't kind to those whose stories refuse the neat endings poets crave. Some legends blaze like torches, others flicker out in the hush between dinner fires and dawn's first bird call. Picture them now, a band of half-heroes and lost wanderers drifting through the night's soft corners. They carry no fleece, no lion's skin, no trophies strung from temple ceilings. Instead, they keep only the warmth of small, stubborn courage enough to chase a dream too big for their names to anchor. No statues stand for them. No altars hold their prayers. Yet here they linger the breath just beyond your candle's flame. Odd detail you might hold close as you drift in some remote villages. Children toss pebbles into rivers, one for each dream they've been told is too small to remember. The current catches them, pulls them under. Maybe each stone is a promise that even the tiniest courage floats somewhere waiting for a sleepy mind to gather it up and cradle it for a moment longer. So as your thoughts tiptoe toward dreams, tonight listen for these echoes, doomed quests humming at the far edge of your breath. No fanfare, no thunder, no thunderous gods to judge their failures. Just quiet courage that never found its ending, settling into your heartbeat like an old secret. And when you wake tomorrow, may you carry a sliver of that hush proof that some stories fade, not because they failed, but because they chose to slip softly where no marble hero dares tread. Now close your eyes, a little heavier than before. Let these whispers of cursed heroes and their soft regrets drift down your shoulders like a blanket spun from old myths and warm hushes. Feel the last flicker of torchlight fade behind your eyelids, each doomed quest folding itself into the gentle rhythm of your breath. There's nothing left to chase tonight, no fleece to steal, no labyrinth to slip through, no wing to mend. Only the hush of the room you rest in the faint memory of footsteps left behind in starlit sands, and the promise that even the most fragile courage lingers somewhere in your dreams. So, breathe easy. Let the echoes of these stories settle into the quiet hum of sleep. May your own worries soften like olive leaves in the dusk, cradled by winds that carry no curses, only calm. If you'd like to return to gentle tales like these, you can always find your way back here, quietly, of course. And before you drift off entirely, maybe leave a sleepy whisper. What ancient dream or forgotten hero should we unravel next?